Rome lasted 1,200 years. Let me put that in perspective. The gap between the founding of Rome and the fall of the Western Empire is longer than the gap between the fall of Rome and today. It started as a muddy village of huts on 7 hills beside a river. It ended as the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, stretching from the reign of northern Britain to the sands of the Sahara, from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the deserts of Iraq. 60 to 70 million people, a quarter of everyone alive, all governed from a single city. They built roads you can still walk on, aqueducts still standing, laws we still use, and a language that became 5 others. They invented concrete, the shopping mall, the fire brigade, and the news bulletin. And then, slowly, it all came apart. This is the entire story, from the first mud brick to the last emperor, in 20 minutes. How did a tiny town on the Tiber conquer the world, and why couldn't it hold on? Let's start at the very beginning, with a myth, a murder, and 2 brothers raised by a wolf. The Romans told a story about where they came from, and it is not a gentle one. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, were the sons of the war god Mars. A jealous king ordered them drowned in the Tiber, but the basket washed ashore, and a she-wolf found them and suckled them under a fig tree until a shepherd took them in. When they grew up, they decided to build a city on the hills where they'd been saved. But they couldn't agree on which hill or who was in charge. They argued. Romulus began building a wall. Remus mocked him and jumped over it. So Romulus killed his own brother and named the city after himself, Rome. The traditional date is the 21st of April, 753 before Christ. It began, in the Romans' own telling, with fratricide, a city born in blood. Romulus needed people, so he declared the town a refuge for runaways, exiles, and outlaws. He had men, but no women, so he invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival and then abducted their daughters. Rome's origin story is theft and murder, but it worked. The village grew. For its first 2.5 centuries, Rome was not a republic and not an empire. It was a kingdom, ruled by 7 kings, one after another. Romulus was the first. The others were a mix of Romans, Sabines, and crucially, Etruscans, the sophisticated civilization to the north who taught Rome how to be a city. Under the Etruscan kings, Rome drained its swampy valley and built the great sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, still draining the city today. They paved the Forum, built the first temples, and gave Rome its symbols of power, the eagle, the purple robe, the bundle of rods called the fasces. Rome grew rich and organized. But the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant. He ruled by fear, murdered rivals, and ignored the Senate. The breaking point came when his son assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia, who took her own life in shame. The outrage was volcanic. A nobleman named Brutus led an uprising, drove the royal family out, and swore that Rome would never again be ruled by a king. That oath would define Roman politics for the next 500 years. The word king, rex, became the dirtiest word in the language. In 509 before Christ, Rome invented something new. Instead of 1 king for life, they would elect 2 leaders called consuls, and only for a single year. 2 so each could veto the other. 1 year so no one could get comfortable with power. Above them sat the Senate, 300 elder statesmen who advised and controlled the money. This was the Republic, and its motto was carved everywhere, SBQR, the Senate and the people of Rome. But it wasn't a democracy as we'd know it. Power belonged to the wealthy families, the patricians. The ordinary citizens, the plebeians, did the fighting and the working but had almost no say. So they did something clever. They went on strike. They marched out of the city and refused to come back until they got rights. It worked. Over the next 2 centuries, the plebeians won their own officials, the tribunes, who could veto anything, and eventually the right to hold the highest offices. Rome's genius was this constant, grinding compromise between rich and poor, a political machine that could bend without breaking. And that stable machine was about to be pointed outward, at the whole of Italy. Every ancient people had an army. Rome had a system. The Roman legion wasn't a mob of heroes. It was a machine of interchangeable parts. Each legionary carried the same short stabbing sword, the same heavy javelin, the same curved shield. They didn't charge in a screaming wave. They advanced in tight blocks, threw their javelins to shatter the enemy line, then closed in and stabbed, rotating fresh men to the front so the killing never tired. When they camped, even for a single night, they built a fortified rectangle with ditches and walls, the same layout every time, so any soldier knew exactly where everything was. And here was Rome's real secret weapon, its bottomless resilience. When Rome lost a battle, and it lost many, it simply raised another army and came back. Other cities surrendered after one defeat. Rome did not know how. Slowly, methodically, Rome fought its way across the Italian peninsula, defeating the Latins, the fierce Samnites in the mountains, and the Greek colonies of the south. By 270 before Christ, all of Italy answered to Rome, and a rising Rome now stared across a narrow sea at the richest power in the Western world, Carthage. Carthage was everything Rome was not, a seafaring, trading empire on the coast of North Africa, fabulously rich, with a navy that ruled the Mediterranean. The two powers fought 3 wars over more than a century, the Punic Wars, and they nearly destroyed Rome. In the First War, Rome had no navy, so it built one from scratch, copying a wrecked Carthaginian ship, and beat Carthage at sea. But the Second War brought Rome's greatest nightmare, a general named Hannibal. Rather than sail, Hannibal marched an army, with war elephants out of Spain over the freezing Alps, losing thousands to cold and ambush, and descended into Italy where no one expected him. For 15 years he rampaged across the peninsula, undefeated. At Cannae, he surrounded and annihilated a Roman army of 80,000 men in a single day, the worst defeat in Roman history. Any other state would have surrendered. Rome refused. It raised new legions, avoided battle, and finally sent a young general, Scipio, to attack Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal home to defend it. Scipio crushed him. In the Third War, Rome finished the job, burned Carthage to the ground, and the legend says, sowed the ruins with salt. With Carthage gone, nothing could stop Rome. In the space of a single lifetime, it swallowed the entire Mediterranean world. It turned east and conquered the successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great, defeating the phalanxes of Macedon and Greece. It absorbed the wealthy cities of the Greek East, and with them, Greek culture flooded into Rome. Educated Romans learned Greek, copied Greek statues, worshipped Greek gods with Roman names, and hired Greek tutors for their children. As the poet said, captive Greece took her savage conqueror captive. Rome now called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, our sea. But conquest changed Rome, and not for the better. Enormous wealth poured into the city, and with it, hundreds of thousands of enslaved captives. Rich families bought up vast estates worked by slaves, and the small farmer soldiers who had built Rome came home from years of war to find their land gone and no work. They drifted to the city, poor, angry, and idle. Rome had conquered the world but broken its own middle class. The Republic had survived kings, Hannibal, and every enemy abroad. Now it would face the deadliest enemy of all, itself. It began with 2 brothers who tried to fix things. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus were reformers who wanted to give public land back to the poor. The Senate saw it as an attack on their wealth and had them both killed. That was the moment the rules broke. For the first time in centuries, Roman politics was settled with blood in the streets, and once that door was opened, it never closed. Next came the generals. A commander named Marius reformed the army, letting the landless poor enlist. Now soldiers had no farms to return to, so they looked to their general for land and money, which meant the legions became loyal to their commander, not to Rome. It was a fatal flaw. Marius clashed with his former officer Sulla, and for the first time in history, a Roman general marched his army on the city of Rome itself. Sulla won, made himself dictator, and pinned lists of his enemies in the Forum, thousands of names, all to be hunted down and killed. The Republic still existed on paper, but everyone had now seen the truth. Whoever controlled the loyal legions controlled Rome. And the most gifted, most ambitious Roman who ever lived was watching and learning. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and he understood the new rules perfectly. He was a brilliant politician, a spellbinding speaker, and desperately in debt. He needed a military command to win glory and pay, so he took Gaul, roughly modern France. Over 8 years, he conquered 300 tribes, killed or enslaved perhaps 1 million people, and became the richest and most famous man in Rome, with an army of hardened veterans who worshipped him. That terrified the Senate. They ordered him to give up his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, which meant certain destruction by his enemies. Caesar had a choice: obey and be ruined, or rebel. In January 49 before Christ, he brought his army to a small river marking the border of Italy, the Rubicon. By law, no general could cross it under arms. Caesar sat on the bank, then rowed across, saying the die is cast. It was open civil war against the Republic itself. He chased his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, defeated him, and pursued him to Egypt, where he met a young queen named Cleopatra. Within a few years, Caesar had beaten every rival and stood utterly alone at the top of the Roman world. Caesar was now master of Rome, and he did not hide it. He had himself made dictator, first for 10 years, then for life. He put his own face on the coins, something only done for gods and kings. He wore the purple robe and the golden wreath. To many Romans, this was the ultimate horror, the return of the monarchy, the very thing their ancestors had sworn to prevent. A group of about 60 senators, including men Caesar had forgiven and promoted, decided he had to die to save the Republic. Among them was Brutus, a descendant of the very man who had expelled the last king. On the 15th of March, 44 before Christ, the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate. The conspirators crowded around him as if to present a petition, then drew hidden daggers. He was stabbed 23 times and fell dead at the foot of a statue of his old rival Pompey. But the murder solved nothing. The people loved Caesar, and they turned on the assassins with fury. Instead of restoring the Republic, the killing plunged Rome into another round of civil war, and out of that chaos would rise not a free state, but an emperor. Caesar had named an heir in his will, his teenage grandnephew, Octavian. Nobody took the sickly 19-year-old seriously. That was a mistake. Octavian was as ruthless and patient as his great uncle was bold. First he allied with Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony, and together they hunted down and destroyed the assassins. Then the two of them turned on each other. Antony went east and fell in love with Cleopatra of Egypt, and Octavian brilliantly painted him as a traitor seduced by a foreign queen, betraying Rome. Their fleets met at the Battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. Octavian won. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt and took their own lives, and Egypt, the last great kingdom, became Roman. Octavian now controlled the entire Roman world, and he had learned the lesson of the Ides of March: never call yourself king. So he didn't. He gave power back to the Senate on paper and let them beg him to keep governing. They gave him a new name, Augustus, the revered one, and called him merely first citizen. It was a magnificent illusion. In reality, he was Rome's first emperor, and the Republic was dead. But Rome had never been more at peace. Augustus began 2 centuries of relative peace and prosperity across the empire, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the first time, a traveler could journey from Britain to Syria on safe, paved roads, using a single currency, protected by one law, speaking Latin in the west and Greek in the east. Trade exploded. Grain from Egypt fed a city of 1 million people. Spices came from India, silk from China, wild animals from Africa. And Rome built. This is the age of the monuments we still visit. The Colosseum, where 50,000 spectators watched gladiators and wild beasts. The Pantheon, with a concrete dome unmatched for over 1,000 years. Aqueducts carrying fresh water dozens of miles into every city, feeding public baths, fountains, and even flushing toilets. Rome perfected concrete, central heating, and the apartment block. An ordinary citizen enjoyed comforts that would not be seen again in Europe until the modern age. It looked eternal, and Romans genuinely believed it was. Under a run of capable emperors, the empire reached its greatest size and confidence. But the system had a hidden crack running right through its heart, one that Augustus had never solved. How do you choose the next emperor? The problem with absolute power is that it can land on anyone. There was no clear law for succession, so the throne passed by blood, adoption, or murder. Augustus was followed by his gloomy stepson Tiberius, who retired to an island and let Rome rot. Then came Caligula, who may have been mad, who spent the treasury on spectacle, declared himself a living god, and the stories say, planned to make his favorite horse a consul. His own guard stabbed him to death in a corridor. Then Claudius, the limping, stammering uncle everyone underestimated, who turned out to be a shrewd ruler and conquered Britain before, it said. His own wife poisoned him with mushrooms. And then Nero. Vain, cruel, and obsessed with being an artist, Nero performed on stage while the empire groaned. When a great fire burned much of Rome, rumors spread that Nero had started it to clear space for a golden palace. To deflect the blame, he tortured and executed the city's small new sect, the Christians. Eventually, the army and senate turned on him. Declared a public enemy, Nero fled and took his own life, gasping that the world was losing a great artist. With him, Augustus's family line ended, and the empire nearly tore itself apart, choosing who came next. Rome survived the crisis and entered its golden century, the age the historians call the rule of the 5 good emperors. For once, each ruler chose his successor on merit rather than blood, adopting the most capable man he could find, and it worked beautifully. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest ever size, conquering Dacia, rich in gold, and pushing east all the way to the Persian Gulf. From Scotland to the Sahara, from the Atlantic to the rivers of Iraq, it was the largest empire the Western world would know for centuries. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, did the opposite. He stopped expanding and drew hard borders, most famously the great stone wall across northern Britain that still bears his name, a line saying, "This far, and no further." Then came Marcus Aurelius, a soldier who would rather have been a philosopher, writing his private meditations in a tent on the freezing frontier while fighting off invading tribes. This was Rome at its wisest and strongest. But Marcus made one tragic mistake. He broke the winning formula. Instead of adopting the best man, he left the throne to his own son, Commodus, a vain brute who fancied himself a gladiator. The Golden Age was over, and the long descent was about to begin. In the 3rd century after Christ, the whole system nearly collapsed at once. The trouble was still the same unsolved problem, succession. Now the army simply auctioned the throne to whichever general paid the most, and then killed him when a better offer came along. In one 50-year stretch, Rome had more than 20 emperors, and almost all of them were murdered. This is the crisis of the 3rd century, and it was catastrophic. While emperors fought each other, the borders caved in. Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine and Danube and sacked cities that had not seen an enemy in 300 years. In the east, a resurgent Persian empire actually captured a Roman emperor alive, and the Persians used him as a footstool. The economy imploded. To pay the soldiers, emperors kept shrinking the silver in the coins until money was almost worthless, and prices spiraled out of control. Plague swept through, killing millions. Whole provinces broke away and declared their own emperors. For a few desperate decades, it genuinely looked like Rome was finished, 1,200 years ending in chaos. That it survived at all is astonishing, and it took one brutal, brilliant soldier to drag it back from the edge. The man who saved the empire was Diocletian, a common-born soldier who seized power and completely rebuilt the state. He accepted that one man could no longer rule so vast a territory, so he split it, appointing colleagues to govern the East and the West together. He fixed the coinage, reorganized the provinces, and turned the emperor into a remote, godlike figure hedged with ceremony. It worked. The crisis ended, but his power-sharing scheme collapsed into civil war the moment he retired, and out of that war rose the most consequential emperor since Augustus, Constantine. Constantine reunited the empire under his sole rule, and he made 2 decisions that changed the world forever. First, he embraced Christianity, the once persecuted sect, ending the persecutions and setting it on the path to becoming the dominant religion of Europe for the next 1,500 years. Second, he built a dazzling new capital in the east, on the site of an old Greek town called Byzantium, and named it after himself, Constantinople. The center of gravity of the Roman world was shifting east toward the wealthier, more populous provinces. The old city of Rome was becoming a magnificent, but increasingly powerless, relic, and the western half was being left dangerously exposed. The Western Empire's final century was a slow-motion catastrophe. The trigger came from the far east of the map, the Huns, ferocious mounted nomads sweeping out of the steppe, terrifying everyone in their path. Fleeing the Huns, entire Germanic peoples, the Goths, the Vandals, and others, begged to be let inside the empire for safety. Rome admitted them, then abused and starved them, and the desperate refugees revolted. At the Battle of Adrianople, the Goths destroyed an entire Eastern Roman army and killed the emperor. The spell was broken, the legions were not invincible. From then on, the western borders leaked like a sieve. Whole tribes marched across Gaul and Spain and Africa, carving out their own kingdoms on Roman soil. In 410, the unthinkable happened. The Goths under Alaric sacked the city of Rome itself. It had not fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The shock rang across the world. Then the Huns themselves invaded under Attila, the scourge of God ravaging Gaul and Italy before he suddenly died. The Western Empire was now a hollow shell, its emperors puppets, its armies made of the very barbarians it once fought, its provinces gone. The end was only a formality. The end, when it came, was almost quiet. By the 470s, the Western Roman Emperor ruled little more than Italy, and even that was really controlled by the commander of his barbarian soldiers. The last man to hold the title was, by a strange twist of history, a boy, and his name combined the founder and the first emperor, Romulus Augustulus, little Augustus. He was a puppet installed by his father. In 476, a Germanic general named Odoacer, tired of the charade, simply deposed the boy. He didn't even bother to kill him. He pensioned him off to a villa in the countryside. And then Odoacer did something telling. He didn't claim to be emperor of the West. Instead, he sent the imperial robes and crown back to the emperor in Constantinople, declaring that the East could rule alone. The West no longer needed an emperor of its own. And that was it. No great final battle, no burning of the city. The Western Roman Empire didn't so much fall as fade away, dissolving into a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms that would slowly become the nations of Europe. 1,200 years after Romulus, the line of emperors in the West simply stopped. But was that really the end of Rome? Not even close. Here is the twist the school textbooks often miss. Rome did not really fall in 476. Only the western half ended. The Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Constantinople, carried on calling itself Roman for another 1,000 years, its people never stopping being Romans until Constantinople finally fell in 1453. And even then, Rome refused to die. Its language, Latin, evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and gave English half its vocabulary. Its laws became the foundation of legal systems across the world. Its alphabet is the one you are reading right now. The Catholic Church inherited its structure, its Latin, and even the title of its old high priest, Pontifex. Kings and dictators for centuries called themselves Caesar, from Kaiser to Tsar. Its roads shape the map of Europe, its calendar governs your year, and its architecture, the dome, the arch, the column, still fronts the banks, courthouses, and capitals of the modern world. A city that began as a few huts of outlaws on a hill grew to rule the world, and then, in a way, never stopped ruling it. That is the entire history of Rome, from a wolf and two brothers to an empire that outlived its own death. Thanks for watching.